To the legislative breakfast. And we've called it that for years, and I always tell people there's very little breakfast about this gathering, but at least it's a good time to get everyone together. So on behalf of the chamber, again, I welcome you here. I would like to introduce Christian Bloom from the university, and he'd like to maybe also give you a welcome.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. We're proud to partner with the Jasper Chamber to put this event on, and we look forward to a great discussion here. Welcome to not only the campus, but to the Center for Technology, Innovation, and Manufacturing. Thanks, Nancy.
I'd like to welcome everyone and also the media that are here. Thank you for covering this. We appreciate that so much. And TV 18 is in the back, and they will be rebroadcasting this at some point in the very near future. So if everyone could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll follow pretty much the same procedure that we've used for many years. Our legislators will inform us of things that are going on at the State House while they're actively involved in the legislative session. And then if anyone has questions, I have some paper and pens on the aisle. Please write those down, and we'll be collecting those, and I will read those questions after the legislators are finished presenting. So now I'd like to introduce State Representative Shane Lindauer and our State Senator Mark Messmer. And you guys can decide who wants to go first and what you want to talk about.
Hello? You got me? Okay. So first I just want to say, well, my name is Shane Lindauer. I'm State Representative for District 63, which encompasses portions of Du Bois, Davies, Pike, and Martin counties. Thanks to WJTS and Christian and Nancy for sponsoring the events and for bringing us all here together. So thank you all for being here as well. I've said several times, for all the trouble we have in our country, and we have trouble, we have problems, right? We still live in the greatest country on earth, where we can all participate in the process. So whether we agree or disagree, appreciate you all being here and taking part in the process. So this is my 6th session, if I didn't say that already, at the Indiana State House. I was caucused in to replace now Senator Mike Braun. And this session, I've got 7 bills that I'm working on, that 5 of which were brought to me from basically directly from constituents, 2 of which I brought back from, well, they're repeats from last year, and then I've got a few that I'm also co-author on. So I'll just kind of briefly run through those, and then it's a budget year, and so that's always a bill that takes up, frankly, it sucks up a lot of the oxygen in discussions. It impacts a large percentage of the bills that go through. It's not uncommon for a bill to go through one committee and then have to be recommitted to budget committee and essentially go through two committee hearings. So budget year is typically a big year, which is why we have a little bit longer session to deal with. That bill is there's still groups coming in, at least on the House side, still groups coming in and presenting their individual budgets. The different agencies, secondary institutions come in and present their ideas for budgets and things like that as well. So in any case, the bills that I'm working on, like I said, the first 5 come directly from conversations I had in the off season with constituents. One is House Bill 1105. It's Du Bois Superior Court. It allows the Du Bois Superior Court to establish basically a second court, and they have to come to the Indiana General Assembly to allow that to happen. They actually came to a summer study committee, presented why they needed that. That was approved in summer study, so now it has to go through the full General Assembly to happen. There are a few courts around the state that are in process of doing that, so rather than hear my bill and 5 other bills that deal with the same thing, all those are getting wrapped up into one bill. So we'll take care of Du Bois County. I also represent Davies County, as I said earlier. They're having the same issue, or the same request, I should say. So that's all going to get wrapped up in another House Bill 1114 that will kind of capture several courts from around the state. So we should see some movement on and make that happen. House Bill 1106 is conversations I had with folks in Pike County. It's mine reclamation. It's a tax credit for outside investors, for groups that want to come in and invest on reclaimed coal ground specifically. Doesn't impact just Pike County, obviously. There's a whole swath of kind of southwestern, up the western edge of Indiana that this could impact. Pike County specifically has been having trouble. I-69, for those of you, I'm sure most of us are familiar with, I-69 kind of goes right through Pike County, and right off of there, they've got a mega site it's ready for development and ready to go, and they've got a group down there aggressively working to get development. So their lack of development is not for lack of effort. They are a very aggressive group and doing everything they can to get some folks there. There's always a little bit of concern from outside investors because, again, it's reclaimed ground, and so there are, at times, issues that go along with that. They've had, though, outside geological surveys and things done from outside groups that show that ground is pretty good and ready for development. And so what this bill is trying to do is just further incentivize a company, outside investor group, to come in and develop there, frankly. And a lot of times, what we've seen around the state is if you can just get that kind of one anchor business to come in and start the process, then then other businesses will come along. So we're hoping to get that going. Haven't had a firm commitment from Ways and Means Chairman on that yet, but we're still working on it. So there's a House Bill 1107 is restricted access to addresses and phone numbers. So this one deals with basically data and the ability for basically anyone in this room to ascertain a great deal of data and information about everyone else in this room if they know how to do it. So we're looking at ways that maybe limiting that or scaling that back if we can. This one, not sure if we're going to get a whole lot of traction on that this year. We've still got some work to do, I think, as we've been running the traps, as they say, and beginning the process. It looks like there's probably going to be a little bit more work to do on this one. We may get some aspects of it done this year, but I don't know if the whole bill is going to move. And then similarly, I met with the group of directors of community corrections this offseason, and so they identified a couple things that they wanted to see changed that would allow them a little more freedom, a little more flexibility, not to have to jump through hoops to get access to information to do their job, essentially. So there again, we're still working on that. There might be aspects of that bill that move this year, but there's a few issues there that we might have to work through and change some language on. So we'll see what happens there. There's another bill that was brought to me again by a group here in Jasper. Outdoor refreshment areas, or designated outdoor refreshment areas. So this was something I had not heard of prior to my discussion with them. You might hear the word DORA is kind of the acronym for those. Michigan has these, Ohio has these, I know these, Arkansas, so there's some surrounding states. This isn't a brand new idea. But I think that the basic idea, kind of in a nutshell, is that it allows local units, so to give cities and towns, Jasper, Huntingburg, the ability to create designated areas that are exempt from certain open container laws. There's guardrails put around it. The ATC still has to approve it, but I'm thinking, 4th Street in Huntingburg, that area with the park and stuff there, great spot. Certainly not telling Mayor Schwinghammer what to do, but it'd be a great area to have a great spot for something like that, and it just allows, again. So there has to be 4 licensed retailers that are already licensed to sell alcohol in that space. So, I could walk into one of these places, purchase a beer or something, and then walk out. And as long as I'm in this designated outdoor refreshment area, which will be noted by signs, again, there's some parameters put on this, I can walk around outside with a beer. I could wander into a candle shop or a clothing store or something if that retailer is okay with that. They have to be participating in that as well. So anyway, it's kind of a neat idea. It's a way, hopefully, to increase tourism and commerce and retain and attract. We all are worried about retaining and attracting young people, talent, and that kind of stuff. So certainly not saying this is a magic bullet for that, but it's maybe another little tool in that tool bag for local. And again, it's all up to local units. So the mayors, the city councils, town councils will have to, work on that, pass an ordinance, and then it'll have to be sent back up to the state. The ATC will have to pass that. So that one is on third reading Monday. So hoping to have that passed out of the House, and then Senator Messmer is going to get control of that when it goes over to the Senate, so which I expect it to do. House Bill 1337 is dealing with emergency powers. So this was an issue that we've been working on for a while. It came out during COVID, and the issue that arose was when the governor, and this isn't directed at any governor in particular, it's just an issue that we've kind of identified as maybe needing addressed. The legislature in the past had given the governor, whoever governor that is, pretty broad power to call emergency, to use as emergency power under emergency orders, and he or she has then a broad range of control to do a lot of things that he or she is not normally able to do. And so when COVID happened, I was regularly getting constituents called and said they don't like this, they don't like that, whatever it is. And essentially the legislature, we had no power to do anything because, number one, we were out of session, and the governor, constitutionally, the governor is the only person who has the ability to call us back in to session. It's outside, if it's out, call us back in for a special session. So there was really nothing that we could do. And so what I'm trying to do with this bill, and others have tried to do the same thing, is say the governor has basically 30 days. So it tweaks the title in Indiana code where we've given him this power in the past, him or her this power in the past. And it says after you've got 30 days, nobody denies that if there's some sort of emergency that happens in the state, there should be some sort of executive power to handle those problems, right? I mean, we all acknowledge that. I acknowledge that. But I don't know that the legislature, when they gave this power, contemplated that this would go on for months or years without any input from the legislature. And so what we're doing is we're just tweaking that place in code that would say the governor, he or she would have 30 days to do that. And then after 30 days, if then they want to continue that executive order, the legislature is by necessity then called back in, and we, the legislature, would contemplate do we need to continue the executive order? So there's also a provision in there that says we don't come back in to contemplate anything else. So we're not going to be passing other laws or anything like that. It's just going to be looking at the executive order specifically. So there's a few other provisions in there that I won't go into right now, but I'm happy to answer questions on that if anybody has any questions on that one. House Bill 1008 is actually one of our priority bills. I'm a co-author on that bill. It's dealing with, I don't know how many folks in here have heard of the ESG, the environmental social governance issue, and it's basically saying that Indiana pensions can't be invested, or they can't be solely, the priority can't be given to just solely ESG issues. We believe that Indiana, when you're looking at investing people's money, you need to look at the fiduciary obligation that you have first and foremost, and not some of these other factors that go into this. So that's House Bill 1008. That got a hearing this week. I think it's going to be voted on out of committee this coming week, and so we'll see what happens there. But that's one of the priority bills. I feel like it's got pretty broad support. House Bill 1338 I have is a bill I had last year as well. It just deals with various education issues. We talked last year in here, for those of you who are here, about some of the divisive concepts that are discussed in education at times. And this just says that those divisive concepts cannot be taught. There's also a section on there on data privacy, again, for youth. What we found from different parents I've talked with is at times schools contract with outside groups to come in and they'll do, I'm not saying there's necessarily anything nefarious happening here, but they collect the data on our students, and then when the parents go and try to figure out what that data was that was collected, because it's an outside group, Panorama is one that's always pointed to, which is owned by Meta now, Facebook, is because it's proprietary, it's a private company. parents have no ability to access that. So you can't do a FOIA, Freedom of Information request, like you could with a public school to see what data is collected. And so we're trying to limit the ability for that to happen. So we just want to make sure that information is protected, and you as parents have access to the data that's being collected. And so anyway, that's it for me, I guess. We'll turn it over to Senator Messmer.
Well, thank you, Shane, and thank you, Nancy, and Christian, for inviting us to be here. Thanks for take your time to come out on a Saturday to hear what's going on. I've got 10 bills that I've got filed this session, and one that I filed that I'm not sure I'm going to move because we found out after we drafted it, it might create more problems than it fixes, so sometimes that happens. But actually, the request for the legislation came from the Attorney General, but I think there was the section of code he was trying to update had more business implications than he thought than he was aware of. So, anyway, the bills that I've got, and most of them are moving. Senate Bill 236, and here again, a lot of these come from people who have issues, within your district and ask for help. Senate Bill 236 requires the BMV to get an emergency contact name and number when a student applies for their learner's permit. And it came from a family who's they had several kids in a car with somebody who was, a legal driver. There was an accident, and nobody knew how to get a hold of anybody in that car except the driver. And when you apply for your permit, you'd put my emergency contact, is, Mom Jones, and her number is, and that way and only people that have access to that is law enforcement, emergency personnel, whether it be EMS, police. They would have the only people that would have access to the BMV, and they do to all of that data for the rest of us anyway. Passed out of committee this week, 10-0. Senate Bill 290 requires the BMV to share contact information with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and they asked for this. When people apply for either a Hoosier Veteran Plate, a Purple Heart Plate, Disabled Hoosier Veteran Plate, Support Our Veterans, or an Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal Plate. And you can opt out of that requirement, but when you apply for those plates, your contact information is shared with the Department of Veterans Affairs so they can let veterans know what benefits they might have available to them. And you can opt out. And there's a place in the form that if you don't want to be contacted by them, don't want to be bothered, check the box. And that passed out of committee this week, 10-0 as well. Senate Bill 329, same issue he had on the new Superior Court in Du Bois County. That information that has to be pre-approved in the Summer Study Committee on courts and judicial procedures. And Du Bois County, along with Spencer County, my district, came to that committee over the summer, showed their crime statistics, their court backlog, their backlog, their cases per judge, and that committee has to then say, yeah, you've exceeded the ratios, and you've done your best to deal with your court issues. Senate Bill 329 is scheduled for hearing this week. I think she's going to hear all of our court bills from the Senate side this week, and I did hear Jerry Torr is going to have one bill that encompasses all of them. So it may or may not move in the second half. We may just deal with his one omnibus bill. And Senate Bill 331 is a follow-up from a process that I started in 2019, and it deals with the deposition of child sex abuse victims. So in 2019, I had a bill, Senate Bill 551, and it had about 10 different sections of victims of crimes issues, and one of them was dealing with the deposition of child sex abuse victims and not allowing defense attorneys to depose a child sex abuse victim, without court approval and without the prosecutor present. And really there's, and that one, we couldn't get agreement in committee, so we agreed to amend that out in committee, and they said, talk to the judiciary, folks, to the Supreme Court folks over the summer, come back in 2020 with a new bill. And so in 2020, through a lot of work in the off season, I came back and got Senate Bill 206 and got it passed unanimously in the House, in the Senate. And then as soon as the session was over and the governor signed it, then the ACLU challenged it. And on June 23rd of 2022, the Indiana Supreme Court upheld it unanimously that the process we set up, you can't depose a child sex abuse victim normally. There's a group in town, Tammy Lampert works, a child advocacy resource group here in town. That's the process that, there's a note, and the process we set up, a person who's accused is going to know exactly what they're accused of. And the deposition was what they said they had to have, available to them. But what they were doing was getting the child victim, in and deposing them and pummeling them mentally and making them ask questions that, that children, the stress and anxiety they put those kids through, most of the time the parents said, I'm not bringing my kid back to court and going through this again. And so they go through that process. They go through with the groups like Tammy's group all over the state. They do the forensic interview, and the prosecutors say many times, through that interview, we determine there's not a valid case even to be pursued. But if there's a charge that comes out of it, the defense has access to that interview and that recording, so they know what they're being accused of. But as soon as that bill got upheld last summer by the Supreme Court, in 3 counties, defense attorneys started using an informal interview or a trial court 31 written deposition. We applied it to trial court rule 30, which is the deposition process. So they started using the written deposition, trial court rule 31, to get that interview done, or they were doing an informal interview. And we told Greg Steuerwald, back in 2020, we better put informal interview in the language. And Greg's a great guy. He said nobody would really try to bypass this law by using an interview. Well, they are. So Senate Bill 331 applies trial court rule 30, which it did before, the normal deposition process. Trial court rule 31, which is a written deposition where they'd have to answer the questions in writing, or an informal interview, and I think it even says something or anything similarly like an informal interview. That passed out of committee this week 9-1, and I'm sure, and the guy who voted against it in committee said the defense attorney that was there asked him to at least throw up one no vote, because last time it had no votes. He said, so I'm voting for you. I'm with you on the floor this week. Senate Bill 332, it updates, and we've got 3-mile buffer zone language around our military bases. Been in statute since 2005, but it's very ambiguous on how you actually carry out what it says to do in the 3-mile buffer zone. It allows a lot of the processes, and I think the processes that have occurred in Martin, Davies County and Cass and Miami County around it. It applies to Grissom, it applies to Crane, and it applies to the Glendora Underwater Test Facility. That's an additional base that's tied to Crane. And it's just more prescriptive on the process that needs to occur between local government, between the counties that are around them. I don't know that any of them have a city up to them. I think most of the time it'd be county government. It's just more prescriptive on the processes that need to occur that should be happening today. And it's got just a couple additions. It requires that the commander be allowed to put a non-voting advisory member on the plan commission in those communities, just to give eyes and ears to what's going on. But what it prohibits in that 3-mile buffer really doesn't change. It's just, and I think it said, the types of disruptions that could be adverse, to the defense asset. It's just more prescriptive on what those things are, and it comes from the Department of Defense. Our military-based task force that we set up a couple years ago, they went to look at DoD policy, and 30 other states have language just like this. And the things that we were missing, like I said, we were a little more prescriptive on how. It requires disclosure. If you own property, a residential property in that 3-mile buffer, it just requires disclosure to the people that you're selling it. I can guarantee you anybody that lives around Grissom or Crane knows they live next to Grissom or Crane. And most of the people at Crane that live in that 3-mile buffer work at Crane. So I mean, it's not really, but that's a new provision, and then requiring a non-voting member, by the commander be appointed to those plan commissions, and that's just to, that would trigger that process, that dialogue process more, more reliably, and that passed out of committee 10-0 this week. Senate Bill 333 that came to me from the Indiana Association of Engineers and Architects. It allows the Indiana Building Commission to adopt rules pertaining to specialty inspections on Class 1 buildings. And you say, what in the heck is that? It covers the specialty inspections in Title 17 of the International Building Code, which currently the Building Commission is prohibited from adopting inspection rules, and it just strikes the prohibition, for them to allow inspections on structural steel and high-rise buildings. Currently, there's no provision that actually be inspected, and actually prohibits the state, and one of only 2 states, us and Wisconsin, are the only states in the country that don't allow their building commission, the state building commission, to adopt rules on inspections. Kind of odd, and it's lucky we've never had, catastrophic issues like the bridge failure in Minnesota a few years ago. There was an interstate bridge that collapsed because there hadn't actually been there never could have been an inspection on that bridge, or the structural members that failed would have been caught 3 different times when that bridge went through renovations. So they have it now, but they didn't have it in 2007. But I'm working on an amendment. The folks in the Apartment Association and the Home Builder Association want to make sure, and what they're trying to set up a separate commission within the Building Commission that deals with residential code issues. And they so I'm just trying to address and make sure we don't do. And I think statistically, on large projects, they said across the country, the average cost that adds to a large project is 0.11%. So it's not a big cost item, and on a small project, it might be 0.8%. I mean, that's across the country, averages. But we don't want to. We're dealing with affordable housing issues across the state. We don't want to do something that compounds the problem of affordable housing. So, and there's a House Bill 1575 that sets up that residential R2 and R3, separate commission to deal with residential codes. And I'm trying to work with the Apartment Association and the engineers to look at that language and make it workable for both groups, to where everybody feels like, okay, we can deal with affordable housing, we can deal with public safety, and get them both done at the same time. So didn't quite have the amendment ready I heard the bill got heard Tuesday, and the committee 333 alone was ready to pass it out, but I'm really trying to be conscientious and listen to the folks that are concerned about the residential aspects, and if I can get the 1575 language amended to the point that both the Apartment Association, the home builders, and engineers are satisfied. I don't know that either one will be happy, but satisfied. Put it together, and then run it as one bill. And it'll probably be another week till that's done, because I didn't have it done on Thursday when the committee chair had to post the schedule for Tuesday. Senate Bill 389 deals with inspection and closure requirements for underground petroleum storage tanks, and it's going to get amended Monday morning into Senate Bill 246. The chairman of the Environmental Committee has an overall comprehensive underground storage tank bill that's the IDEM's agency bill, and IDEM's looked at my bill, and they wanted to adjust a couple of the words. We had regulated tank. They want to make sure it's petroleum tank, because under IDEM they got a lot of types of regulated tanks, and they want to make sure it just applies to underground storage tanks. And there was a Indiana IDEM rule we had referred, and in 2 weeks that rule is dropping off, and so we're taking the wording of that rule and putting it in instead of referring to the rule that had the content in it. So that should be ready to go for Monday. Senate Bill 390 is a state grant program that would work in conjunction. Last year I passed Senate Bill 411 that dealt with, you could get your county designated as a wind-ready county or a solar-ready county. We had some language in there for a grant program, but it was not a budget year, and so the House Ways and Means Committee says the policy's fine. We'll take the grant portion out, and we'll deal with that in a budget year. And a couple of counties have adopted the wind and solar, ready designation, statewide standards. Du Bois County being one of them. And this would put a state grant of, and right now I have it at $1 per megawatt hour, and I had some of the renewable folks calculate on a 200 megawatt solar field, the megawatt hours that would produce, that would, at $1 megawatt hour, it would generate about $500,000 a year for the county. They would apply to IEDC for that. I think that's how we had it set up last year. And I was told by the appropriations chair he likes the idea. He said at this point we're going to pass the policy, and he said we'll take the funding of it and we'll put it in the budget in the second half of session. He said I don't know if we had it set up at $1 megawatt and $10 million per year max award for wind and solar. And he said it might be $2.5 million, it might be $5 million, it might be whatever. He said we don't know what in April when we get our second revenue forecast. Last year we had several billion extra. Some years we have hundreds of millions less. So he said we'll plunk in the dollars when we get the budget in the second half, but we'll go ahead and get the policy in and get it moving the first half without the fiscal impact identified. Senate Bill 472 is a bill that deals with advanced recycling, and there's a company called Brightmark in Ashley, Indiana, and they're just trying to codify the processes that they do, because with IDEM, like many other issues, it's not considered solid waste. It's not it doesn't fall into anything that IDEM does. So they take the number 3 through number 7 mixed-use plastics, your microwavable dishes, plastics that are not easily recycled. Number 1 and number 2 plastic, we recycle it here at our county sites. I mean, number 1 and number 2 plastic has tons of uses and lots of people that recycle it. The 3 through 7 does not, and they're the only company in Indiana recycle them, and there's about 40 other companies like them across the country. They take that number 1 or that 3 through 7 plastic, and they put heat and pressure on it and break it down to its original base elements, and petroleum products, waxes, and all of that can be resold as a virgin material. And what this bill would do, it would codify the processes that it takes to do that, and it would make sure it's classified as a manufacturing process. They don't do any they don't take anything if it's contaminated with solid waste, they don't even take it. I mean, it's got to come in to where they're dealing with, with the plastic, and this matches what's been done in 21 other states. They still have to apply with all IDEM requirements if they need an air permit or wastewater permit. All of the other permit requirements, still apply. And it would take any of the plastics that they recover get counted towards. We have a statewide goal of recycling. I don't know what it is by 2025. 50% of our solid waste. I mean, we're not even close to that. I think we're maybe 30 to 35%. But any process, any material that they bring in process, gets counted into our recycling goals that the state has. And it's a follow-up to a bill. Last year I had a bill that had 4 different parts of code that IDEM was dealing with on solid waste, recycling of other solid waste products. They wanted to get tagged onto that in the last committee, the last half a session. I said, Matt, that's too big of a bite to throw in, at the tail end. Bring it back as a standalone bill this year, and I expect that it's scheduled for hearing on Monday morning, and I expect that to move through. The Manufacturers Association, who worked on part of the bill last year, had a suggestion for a couple of cleanup amendments just to make sure what we did last year doesn't conflict with this bill this year, and very, very minor amendment that we'll adopt in. And then the last item that I've got that I'm sponsoring, it would allow legislative members, and Shane and I and all 150 of us are appointed to a variety of boards and commissions and committees. And the General Assembly, when you set up a board or commission, and maybe it's part of DNR,